And overcoming obstacles is something that extroverted intuition or exploration kind of enjoys doing, right? It's like, give me an obstacle and overcome it. But we don't always take the time to do the introverted sensing or the memory of the processing of the experience. And at that point, when we process it, well, now we go, oh, I did that, didn't I? Wow, I guess I did that really well. I guess I'm a bit of a badass. Okay, yeah, I have confidence. I can go into the next challenge and I know I'm going to be okay. Not just winging it, not just assuming we can, not taking off more, biting off more than we can chew, but actually with a sober-minded approach going, no, I can handle this because I've handled it in the past. And now we have self-confidence, which removes that obstruction to receiving self-love.
Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This week, we are continuing our series, going through all 16 types in the Myers-Briggs system, talking about how they can love themselves, self-love for all types. And we finally have come to the most impressive and incredible type of all.
Yeah.
The ENFP personality.
That's right. We finally made it.
And I know in the ENTJ podcast, we made a comment that, we might go long on this. And the ENTJs were like, no, we love it. We love when you go long. We got all these comments like, I don't think anyone criticizes you for going long. So if you're an ENFP, just be on alert. No one ever. You'll be the first to criticize. You look at the timestamp, whatever it will be, probably over an hour, because we're going to really get into this. And you're going to be like, what? I can't watch or listen to something over a minute. I'm an ENFP. What do you expect from me, people?
How can you expect me to possibly watch something that's more than a 60-second reel?
I almost thought of, at the beginning of this episode, just having like the list of all the data that they want, I guess, I don't know, ENFPs, and just like read off the list and be like, if you want to understand anything I just said, listen to the full show. But there you go. There's the Cliff Notes.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to, no concessions.
No concessions for ENFPs?
No concessions for the impatient EPs.
But we're special snowflakes. We expect things to be customized to us. I identify with this.
That's true. Well, and you're playing that smart reverse psychology game, because now every ENFP is going to be like,
no, they're not.
I'm not. I'm okay with it.
It doesn't work on us.
And that's the thing about ENFPs, is that they have a bit of a contrarian nature. It's like whatever you accuse them of, they're immediately the opposite.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, we're not. No, we're not, Antonia.
All right, well, let's lay some tracks.
So here's what's going on. Yes.
Let's not pick on ENFPs too much.
Well, I feel like I have permission.
You have permission, I don't.
Yes, but it's okay. So ENFP listening right now, this is going to be a great episode to listen and tune into. We're going to talk about how you can find more self-love through the lens of your personality type. And we're also going to mention some key things at the end of the episode that any of the other 15 types that aren't like us, ENFPs, are also going to be taking away, or that could take away some learning about self-love. So we've been doing this every episode, and we find an avenue or an access point for other types to discover how they can find the same principles learning about ENFP. So if you're an ENFP today, this is going to be a fantastic show. We're going to really unpack the ENFP personality type in the framework of self-love. If you're not an ENFP, you're going to learn a lot about them, because we're going to go through the CAR model from our owner's manual program. So we've created an owner's manual for all the 16 types. And inside of that owner's manual, we've created a framework to understand what are technically called cognitive functions. These are the mental processes we use. That's what ENFP points to. It points to the mental processes that you use as an ENFP, or any type uses in their function stack is what's technically called.
Should we pause that and lay some tracks first to be consistent with the other episodes?
Yes. And I was going to do that in a second. I wasn't going to do the CAR model. I was going to say that's the framework we're using. So if you have the owner's manual for ENFP, you probably want to get that out to follow along. While we do a bunch of other talking, you can go scramble around your room or find where that is, or download it off your computer. I recommend having that in front of you. But yes, we should lay some tracks. Why don't you do that? Okay. Give us some tracks to lay.
Great. I'm actually, because I know that you like consistency between episodes.
I do.
Yeah. And that's why these go long, is because I'm trying to make sure that I hit all the beats for every episode.
It's a very ENFP trait, consistency and congruency through all the episodes of 16.
Well, we will be talking about that in a moment, that trait. But there's a couple things we want to...
It's not always a stereotype.
No, it is not the stereotype, and yet we will be discussing consistency. There's a couple of premises that have followed from episode to episode in this series. The first one is that we are coming from the assumption or premise that all of us are trying to show ourselves love all the time, right? It's not a matter of It's not a matter of figuring out ways to trick your mind or to give affirmations to try to love oneself. We love ourselves. We can't help it. So all of us are trying to show ourselves love. The challenge is, are we receiving love from ourselves? And when we can't receive the love we're trying to give to ourselves, it's usually because we have a bunch of obstructions in the way. We have beliefs, or we have, like these complicated, feelings about our value and worth. There are a lot of different reasons why we don't just immediately receive the love we're trying to give. So one of the premises of this series is showing ourselves love isn't a matter of the giving, it's a matter of removing the obstructions to receiving. And so that's what we'll talk about in this episode. And one of those major obstructions, or some of those major obstructions, have to do with the expectations we're setting for ourselves. If we're not setting the right, proper, appropriate expectations, then those create obstructions to receiving the love we're trying to show for ourselves. So this will be really a matter of going through the CAR model, as you hinted at, and talking about what the most reasonable expectations to set are. And then finally, a premise that we're going on in this series as well is that love isn't earned. We can't earn love, but a good relationship is. And we see this in relationships between people. You don't earn my love. I feel love for you, right? And I just do. And if our relationship were to end, I probably would continue to feel love for you. But, and so you're not earning my love in this relationship, but a good relationship itself, the dynamic, showing each other respect and consideration, showing each other, a willingness to meet halfway, the way we show up for each other, all of that pours into a good relationship that is earned. So it's the same with ourselves. We are not earning love by setting good expectations, but we are earning a good relationship with ourselves. We're earning that through making sure that our self-talk is good, and that while we're setting reasonable expectations, we are doing the hard work of having a good, solid relationship to self.
Yeah. I think one of the tangible ways this shows up for people is usually, it may not be articulated this way to yourself, but it's a sense, or it's a lived feeling you have of, I'm going to give myself love when I fill in the blank, overcome this challenge, fix this trauma, achieve this goal, have this outcome, become this person. Each personality type does it a little differently, but kind of holding it out as a carrot for motivation, or for getting into action, or for doing the right thing, or whatever, however you as a person might say this to yourself. You might not even couch it in that language, but it's like you withhold the love until something else happens. Just like if you were to put conditions on love in a relationship, we do this to ourselves. And that's, from my perspective, very toxic to do that to yourself. And it's removing the love that you can naturally just send back and forth.
Well, and I think ENFPs do this to themselves all the time. They might be even more egregious than other types.
Yeah.
Because they think they can handle it.
Browbeat yourself into action by withholding reward, emotional reward, until an outcome is achieved. And I think you're right. ENFPs, and there's a few other types too, but particularly I think this strikes ENFPs a lot in that. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to go back to that CAR model then.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a quick summary. I have a little frog in my throat, so I'm going to do my best. I'm drinking tea, but for some reason I'm like, something's in my throat, but we'll keep working on this with some tea. But let me go over the CAR model. I think that's really going to be important. So if you have the Personality Hacker Owner's Manual for your personality type ENFP, inside that is a CAR model, and it's just a quick analogy that we use to showcase where the cognitive functions for you as an ENFP, and all types have their own CAR model, but for you as an ENFP, I'm going to just walk through them. I'm going to oversimplify and overgeneralize for the sake of moving quickly into the content today. So there's way more to all of this than I'm going to talk about, but I'm just going to broad brush it really quick.
Yeah. Cognitive functions being the mental wiring.
Yeah.
That really is what diagnoses a person's type.
Yeah. So the 4 letters ENFP point to the mental processes that we use to learn and take in information to perceive our world, and then the mental processes we use to judge or determine the value of that information and what we're going to do about it. So for ENFPs, just imagine your mind is a 4-passenger car. You have a driver up front driving, a co-pilot sitting next to the driver in the front. In the back seat, behind the co-pilot is a 10-year-old, and behind the driver is a 3-year-old. So just imagine this kind of little family driving. This is your mind driving through life, going through life. Your driver as an ENFP is a mental process we've nicknamed exploration. And its technical name is extroverted intuition. It's about external pattern recognition in real time. It does a lot of things, but in general, it takes seemingly disparate ideas or even abstractions and puts them together and see what new possibilities emerge. It is very quick and it's patterning very fast on very little information. And it likes to disrupt the status quo and kind of keep at what it's seeing and see what the meaning behind what it's seeing or the connection point behind what it's seeing is actually emerging from the data or the content that it's looking at or it's perceiving or it's experiencing. But that sounds very abstract because it's a very abstract process, right? So it's not very grounded in reality. It's a very imaginative part of the ENFP. And this is what drives you. This is really where you show up to the world almost like a hero in your life. Co-pilot, right next to that, is a mental process we've nicknamed authenticity. Its technical name is introverted feeling. And this is about what resonates with you at a core level, what your core values are, what motivates you, what you desire and what you want, and how things strike you in a very personal way, how you feel about them, very personal. And it's very interested in the person, the singular person that is you and other singular people and their personal experiencing, what it means to be them. This is very focused on this. And that is how you, the driver and the co-pilot as an ENFP is how you move through the world in the best way possible. These are your two superpowers, to be able to see the patterns that are emerging around you and then be able to judge and determine the quality of all of that based on how it strikes you and how it makes you feel and the motivations it strikes in you. And if you're operating from these places, you're probably a fairly healthy ENFP. And there's exercises and things you can do to strengthen these parts. We talk about in the owner's manual, but there's all sorts of things you can do to strengthen this part of you. And the fact that co-pilot is an avenue for an immense amount of growth and a ton of work can be done there. So that's the good news. That's great, right? But it's a 4-passenger car. There's a little bit of challenging news for all personality types, but we're ENFPs in particular, sitting directly behind the co-pilot sits a mental process that we call about 10 years old in its certainty and kind of the way it sees the world. Its technical name is extroverted thinking. We've nicknamed this effectiveness. This is the part of an ENFP that wants to see results, manage resource, create the to-do list and get it done, see an impact in the world, in the external world. Maybe it's project management, maybe it's leadership. It's the part of you that really wants to create something and create an impact in an external way using sequence and structure and resource. And again, it does all of these do way more than I'm saying. I'm just broad brushing these, but that's a really important part for an ENFP. It shows up a lot and it wants to express itself and it has a lot of proving energy. It really wants to get approval that it's doing a good job. And it, just like a 10-year-old, it has some competence and certainty sometimes, but other times it's uncertain and has a little bit of challenge, and struggle making things happen potentially, or maybe bites off too much. These are some qualitative things I think ENFPs resonate with. And then sitting behind the driver is a mental process we put at around 3 years old. This part of you is nicknamed memory. It doesn't necessarily mean you have a good, or it doesn't necessarily tie to memory, meaning you have a bad memory or a good memory or anything like that. Its technical name is introverted sensing, and why we call it memory is it's looking back at the past and the precedent and everything that's happened up until this point. And it's seeing all the micro and large and small changes that have happened to make this moment be the moment that we're living in. So it's looking at all the etymology, all the tracking of things that have happened and all the timeline that is up to this present moment, both for you as a person, but also for things like society and structures and institutions and all of this. And that has about the certainty level for you as an ENFP around 3 years old. So again, I just went through that very quickly, or we have an entire program dedicated just to going through that for your personality type that goes way deeper into all of those and how they work in harmony to bring you a really good life and how you can use that as a navigational tool for your life. But for the sake of this conversation, I think that's enough for us to get started because we're going to walk through now each of those 4 positions and we're going to talk about those expectations you talked about, Antonia. What's the proper expectation you can have for your driver versus maybe your 3-year-old? I think they're different. I think we've been pausing that every single episode, and we're going to do that here again today to talk about the proper expectations are going to give you an avenue for self-love. If you have too high of expectations where it shouldn't be there, you're going to be demoralized. It's going to obstruct your ability for self-love. And if you have too low expectations where you should have it higher, you're also going to feel less than. You're going to, I could do more. I have more capacity here. So it's really important that we look at these, and they're not all the same, right? They have different functions for you as an ENFP. And so it's really important that we have the proper expectations in our lives and in our personality.
Yep, you got it. So the first 2 functions you mentioned, exploration and authenticity, or extroverted intuition and introverted feeling. Those two functions are functions we feel a high degree of certainty about. We feel certain in them.
The driver and the co-pilot.
That's right. When we are using these functions, and we know that we feel certain in them, for whatever personality type we are, our driver and a co-pilot, we feel a high degree of certainty because it's really hard to insult us in these functions.
Yeah.
Right. If somebody tries to, we can take it as a personal rejection, like they're rejecting us as an individual, but we don't really take what they have to say if they're insulting that part of our, like we're not good at that. We don't usually absorb that. We don't go, oh, they might be right. It's like we go, okay, that's whatever you're talking about. So we have a high degree of certainty in those first two functions. The third and fourth function, the 10-year-old and 3-year-old, or tertiary and inferior, what they're technically called, we have a sense of uncertainty in those functions. And uncertainty is it's like poison to humans. Humans hate the feeling of uncertainty. And that means that our relationship to those functions are going to be tinted with that feeling of uncertainty. So we'll talk about how that should be also informing the expectations that we have. So let's start with the first function. Let's start with the driver, or what's called extroverted intuition or exploration. And our recommendation is, in order to remove an obstruction to feeling self-love, have a high expectation for yourself in this function. And as you mentioned, Joel, if we don't have high enough expectations in the things that we are naturally talented in and the things that we have a tendency to build skill in, the reason why that creates an obstruction to self-love is because we experience disappointment in ourselves. We know we can be doing better. That's what you just said. And so it's important in our greatest strengths and talents to have a high expectation of ourselves so that we're not disappointed in our performance, not thinking, I wish I was doing better. I wish I was more on purpose. I wish I was bringing my gifts to the world. When we have high expectations in these functions, it means that we are adding skill development to talent. And now we're manifesting the best of ourselves.
Yeah.
So what does it look like to have high expectations in extroverted intuition or exploration for an ENFP? Well, the first thing is seeing beyond the initial aha of a pattern and diving deeper into it, really studying it. There's a phrase that has become pretty popular, or at least it was, 10 years ago when I first heard it, which is, don't believe everything you think. And I've been thinking about this phrase a lot because as somebody, I have ENTP preferences, so I use a function called introverted thinking or accuracy. And not believing everything I think is such a game changer for me. It's when I think something, when I believe I've come to a conclusion, but it's like the first time I've really thought about it, I haven't come to a conclusion, right? And if I immediately attach to the first thing I thought, the first opinion I came to, now I haven't really processed that thought. I haven't really figured out how I really think about it and brought in other material and done the math around it. And so I've cut myself off at the beginning. I've created a conclusion from what is actually a starting point. And that's the same, I would say that same principle applies to patterning for extroverted intuition or exploration. The patterns come quickly. They come really fast.
Yeah.
But don't believe every pattern that you think, right? Like, don't believe that first initial. We can use our gut instincts. We can definitely have a high degree of certainty in them. But having a high expectation for this function doesn't mean that we just allow ahas to strike us. It means that we study those ahas. We take a moment to think about it. We take a moment to dive a little deeper and understand maybe the systems that live underneath that, or the whys of it, or the how of it. Like, we go deeper in inquiry around our insights. And so in that way, we build muscles to have higher quality insights in the future. Our ahas become better quality when we do more inquiry around them, as opposed to just going, we make a joke that for extroverted intuition or exploration, one's a pattern, right? The old adage is 3 is a pattern, but for this intuition, it's like one's a pattern. The first time you see something, you form a pattern on it. Well, that's not high quality patterning. And yet, because it is such a high degree of certainty for us, we'll believe the first pattern. So having high expectations means that we don't just believe our patterning from that first initial insight, that we go a little further. We figure out why it was a pattern for us. We see sort of the guts of it. And then that way we're building more skill, because we then understand why that pattern holds water. All right. Why
Yeah.
there's some legs underneath the pattern.
If you're a good communicator as an ENFP and you have a persuasive nature, this can be very insidious because you probably are one of the few people in your world doing this, patterning that quickly. And if you're a good communicator and you can spot what's going on and you get rewarded for that, the speed of it and the quick patterning, especially if like your job rewards it, your scholastic or education system that you're in rewards it, or your family or your partnership, whatever system you're in rewards that speed of quick patterning and then giving the result to somebody. Like, thanks so much. That was really helpful. You're like, ooh, that's the value I give. There's not a lot of pressure on you to maybe grow deeper or go deeper with it. So it's insidious if you're getting rewarded for it. And often ENFPs are. I think most ENFPs, you get rewarded for it in a very utility way. I mean, there's pain and kind of like it gets rejected in other ways, but often you are in a context usually where you can show up with this, even just in the world in large. And yeah, I think there's a deeper version of it. There's a little bit more to it than just a quick hit. That's what's going on, and then moving on. Like it's like drive-by intuition. Like boom, boom, boom. There's the intuition, and it's go on down the road. It's no, stay with it. Park the car, get out, be with your intuition in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think ENFPs are usually pretty good at impressing other people.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the nice things about having ENFP preferences is that you're usually pretty good at talking. You're usually pretty good at like kind of blowing people away.
You can get the job.
Right. Exactly.
Can you do the job?
Yes.
That's an ENFP thing.
That's right. That's exactly it. And so not just living off of the ability to be impressive, not just living off of your ability to pull rabbits out of hats and have an 11th hour experience. You actually, in some ways, you need to have enough of those so that you can really rely on your intuition. You can learn that you can rely on it. And I think that when extroverted intuition or exploration becomes its highest order, right? Like the highest order version of it, I think it can channel almost like you're downloading patterns from the universe and you don't even know where they came from.
Yeah.
And you're doing that as you're talking in real time.
Yeah.
I do believe that that's a possibility. And the only way that an ENFP learns how to channel is by putting themselves in situations where they've had to rely on their intuition in real time and watch themselves do it. But you don't get there through just making assumptions early on. You don't get there through just kind of like being able to BS your way through something, right? To be able to be impressive. You get there by understanding the mechanisms that you're using to make those patterns, or like really kind of diving further into it. So I think the first thing that people with ENFP preferences need to do is set higher expectations for their driver function.
Yeah.
They need to get better at using this. They need to build skill on top of talent.
I think the other element of this, that's the one ENFP that can quickly pattern impress. I think there's another version of ENFP that's a little more reserved, and this ENFP is less likely to play in their intuition or put it on the footing they need. Like they have a lot of parameters around it. For example, being imaginative in the real world or exploratory in the real world. Well, that's insecure because, well, is that going to be accepted, or are people going to be like judging me for that? I think some ENFPs struggle with being able to let it loose, let the weirdness come out, right? Oh, I don't want to be too weird. I got to throttle this. Again, depending on your context, you might have been trained this way. Maybe at a parent or a context of education that was like, it kept tamping that down. We've met a lot of ENFPs in this state. And you kind of like, you're not allowing the full expression of this, the full weirdness expression of it. And so a throttle, and I think building skill is to give yourself opportunities to have those moments more.
Yeah.
Right. Have the conversations you need to have. Have the exploratory kind of weirdness come out a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You said if you're an ENFP that's good at selling an idea, not every ENFP is always selling ideas though, but that capacity is in there.
Yeah.
So it's giving yourself permission to get excited about innovation, right? Like you said, not throttle yourself because maybe it was stamped down as you were growing up. Like you mentioned, some ENFPs and ENTP. I mean, I'm sympathizing with this right now because ENTPs experience this too. It's like you're just so obviously weird, right? You just can't not be weird. That's, I would say, of all of the types, ENP types are the most obviously weird because they're unlike the INJs, with introverted intuition or perspectives. It's like, that's a quieter version. Right. And I think the ones who are punished for weirdness just start to fly under the radar. But your extroverted intuition or exploration, it's like you can't shut it off. And so one can get in a place where they're trying to mitigate the damage of that. But it's not a bug, it's a feature. And so getting to a point where you go, no, like innovation is the thing I do, and selling good ideas is the thing I do. That's a part also of having high expectations, is being okay when you're trying to sell an idea and people aren't buying it, realizing that it's your job, just like it's your job to not believe your first aha and go a little deeper. It's your job to also make sure that you're paring ideas down to their best ones and selling the best ones. Because there's a reason why the world has a throttle against every new idea. If we implemented every new idea, it would create extraordinary problems. And so that throttle in the world, the thing that slows us down, the pushback we get, is actually in our best interest. It forces us to make sure that the idea that we're attempting to sell is one that we stand by. And for an ENFP, they want to make sure that this is a truly good idea when they're selling it to another person. And in that way, it also forces their intuition to become higher caliber.
There's one more that I have in the top of my head, and you might have some more on your list about capacity here. There's also the ENFP, and this is me, so I'm speaking from personal experience, that walks into a room and assumes that the world in that room was just created the moment they stepped into it. So they enter maybe talking, or kind of a dominant process there. That extroverted intuition or exploration is very dominant, and it's like, well, my idea clearly is the best, and maybe interrupting people. Again, personal experience. We're really working on it. Not letting other people kind of contribute. You're really too driving the intuition, or you're driving all the patterns, and it's got to be your way, and it's too one note. And I think, in my younger days, I would say, well, I'm an ENFP. That's what do you expect? That's how I have to say this right now and interrupt because the pattern's here. Well, I've learned that I can grow skill and capacity for slowing down a little bit and letting other people's ideas come in, and then using those as well in the entire intuition of it all. And I think when I was younger, I was much more likely, and I still struggle with it sometimes, cutting people off, overriding, just bulldozing with the intuition in the room, and not letting, because there's other people that have other ideas that will add to it and make it better. But that's something that has to be developed in skill. And when you're so fast with this process, and it just drives everything in your life, that's not always obvious to you as an ENFP. You have to realize, oh, wait, if I can just slow it down a little bit, or interface or be interoperable with it, it actually strengthens it. It doesn't maybe have the speed it once had, but man, it's still pretty fast, and it's really deep when it comes up with insights and connections. So you can stretch it and exercise it by weaving other people and the interoperability into that process. Yeah,
it's really important to find people who will play in that playground with you.
Yeah.
I think.
And that's a high expectation, I think, to be able to stretch there and incorporate others.
Absolutely. You're talking about almost like a solipsistic perspective, right? Yeah. I invent the world as I walk through it.
Yeah.
And I think when there is a more dominant energy to the ENFP, and when they don't have a lot of people around them that can play in their sandbox, I think that ends up happening. And I think it is, I think the higher expectation is, well, I have to find the people who will challenge me.
Yeah.
I have to find people who can play in that sandbox and help me refine my ideas,
and
for
throttle
sure.
myself down to be able to interoperability with them. Be interoperable with them.
Right.
Is the frame.
Yeah. Exactly. And so whether you're somebody with extroverted intuition or exploration as a driver that has been overly throttling yourself, or one that has been almost bulldozing, the higher expectation for both is to find a center point where you are bringing yourself, your innovations, your assertion around, the higher quality patterning that you're doing. Because I find that the ones that throttle themselves are usually doing more thinking around their patterning.
Yeah.
They were forced to have higher quality thinking. Otherwise it was rejected, but they're not asserting themselves as much.
Or maybe not as fast.
Right. And then you've got the types that assert themselves maybe too fast, and they need to throttle it a little bit. But there's a center point here. There's a balance in the middle. And so finding that balance for the function is, it's hard. It's really difficult. There are so many rewards that come along with being imbalanced in this way, right? There's a lot of things that there's a reason why you made the choice to be this way. And so you're going to have to give up some of the benefits that come with sort of being a more throttled version that is trying to do the fly under the radar, which is very hard to do, but sometimes ENFPs attempt it. or the ENFP that is like, nope, it's a feature, not a bug, and I'm going all in. There are benefits that come with either one, but there's still a need to find a balance and a center point in the middle.
Yeah.
And that higher order, again, if you can find that balance, there's a lot of capacities waiting for you on the other side, including like what I said was channeling. Now, what is channeling? I don't know. I just know that the function has the capacity to almost in real time get downloads from the universe as one is talking. And I think public speaking is a fantastic way for an ENP to learn how to, to kind of trust that the next word is going to be available for them. So impromptu public speaking or extemporaneous public speaking, and then brainstorming sessions. Brainstorming sessions are very, very, very important for people of this type. And that helps them, like you said, be more collaborative in the intuition to understand that other ideas are helping them build higher quality ideas themselves.
Yeah.
So embracing innovation, but also embracing collaboration at the same time.
Any other comments about the driver before we move on?
I think the last one is this is a very adaptable function. And so learning how to not just be adaptable to skirt problems or be adaptable to, for ENP types in general, adaptability is oftentimes like their get out of jail free card for not doing the thing they were supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just skirting responsibility or trying to get out of stuff that you don't want to do. It's actually an adaptability to ameliorate situations, maybe unexpected situations, into opportunities, turning them into opportunities for growth in particular, or opportunities to build greater skill. And then also using this part of you, because this is a very effervescent function. I almost think of it as being sort of carbonated, right? It's like it's possibilities thinking and what if, and it's very optimistic. So maintaining that sense of carbonation, that sense of optimism.
Yeah.
And that ends up being very inspiring to other people. Like you're a model of optimism. So that's an expectation. An expectation is that you will model optimism. Now, that doesn't mean that you're always going to be in a good mood, nor should you believe that. And it doesn't mean that it's your job to always be optimistic in behalf of other people. It's just the function itself does better when it's optimistic. And so having that be your set point, even though there are times when you, of course, will dip down, not feel as good, that's okay, right? Give yourself permission to not constantly be on. But also understand that if you're not feeling optimistic and you've not been feeling optimistic for a long time, that's probably something that needs to be attended to in your intuition.
Yeah. You talked about balancing this function of exploration. And as we move over to the co-pilot now of authenticity, technically called introverted feeling, we're going to talk about it in a silo of itself, but it will help you balance your driver. These two things come in tandem, and as a 1-2 punch, you can operate your life very well by having both of these working together. And so as we talk about this in isolation, don't forget that it's going to serve, as you develop the co-pilot in particular, it's going to genuinely serve the driver a lot, and it's going to help temper it and give it what it needs. It's going to slow it down. It's going to have it be empathetic or sympathetic to walking into a room, talking, and interrupting or bulldozing or throttling. You can use the co-pilot a lot to help refine the driver, is what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
So as we tune to this, keep that in mind as an ENFP. So in your car model, if you're following along from the owner's manual, let's go to the co-pilot. Let's talk about the expectations here. What are some proper expectations at the co-pilot level?
So this function is also a function that has a high degree of certainty attached to it. But, and this is something I've mentioned in the other episodes of this series, there is a model that our friend and coach, Dr. John Beebe, invented that talks about each of these positions having a kind of energy that follows it. And the driver function, he calls it has a heroic energy. So it's like that driver is the function that we always want to be solving all problems with. He says that the co-pilot, or the auxiliary function, technically the auxiliary, has a bit of a parental energy that comes along with it. So unlike the driver that feels certain and in a heroic way, right? Like I'm doing this for me because I know that I'm great at this.
Yeah.
This is more of a certainty when helping guide other people, when helping be like in almost a parental way. Now, parenting is, and we've mentioned this in the other episodes, parenting is a thankless job. And it requires a lot of responsibility, a lot of sense of stepping up and contributing, even if those that you're contributing to will never thank you. Or maybe they will at some point way down the line when they're like way older and have their own kids. Maybe then. But for the most part, parenting is not something that we do to get the reward of feedback. We have an intrinsic reward mechanism in parenting. Like we feel, if we've been a good parent, we feel good about ourselves, even if our kids don't recognize it. So that's important to understand when recognizing that this is a high degree of certainty function, and it has a tendency to be used in behalf of other people. So keep that all in mind as we talk about the high expectations, because part of the expectation for this function is contribution. All right, what we're doing in behalf of other people. But it's an introverted function, weirdly enough. So how does one use introverted feeling or authenticity, what's right for me? How does one use that in behalf of other people and in parenting? Well, the first thing is high expectations means a high degree of introspection. It means being very in touch with how you are experiencing things, how things are making you feel. And it also means that in order to swim in that world, you're going to have to get good at emotional processing. You're going to have to figure out techniques and strategies to sit with your emotions, to allow them to do full cycles of processing, to get to the other side, to feel catharsis and relief from your own emotional experience, and to be able to understand what that means about you as a person. These things that impact you in these emotional ways, why did they impact you that way? What does it say about your values? What does it say about your identity and who you are? What does it say about your experience? What does it say about your motivations and intentions and desires and drive? All of these things need to be the ENFP needs to be very in touch with these things, and not in a lip service way, not in a I know who I am and that's the end of it way, but in a maybe I don't know who I am as well as I thought I did. And maybe I need to do some real spelunking inside, not make the assumption, not have a degree of certainty that I know who I am and what I stand for. But just like with the intuition, don't believe everything you're patterning. Don't always assume you know what you're feeling. Don't believe every feeling, right? Really understand it. Really get into the guts of it, and see it from all like really truly experience that sense of relief and catharsis that comes on the other side of true emotional processing.
I think this will metricize or show up for you as an ENFP by you admitting your motivations or reasons for things, like truly admitting to yourself. You don't have to admit it out loud, but like, yeah, that person made me feel jealous or envious, and I acted out because I felt like they were going to take something that was mine, or yeah, I have to admit to myself that's what was driving it. And I think an ENFP that gets to that place, that's the metric for this being developed well and operated well. So then you also know your desires too. Like, what do you want? It's like, I know exactly what I want, or like, I pretty much know which direction I want. I kind of know what's going to resonate or not resonate with me in a desire way. So I think desire and motivation, those are the two levers. Like, know what I'm desiring and why, and what is motivating me and why. Really being honest with myself. If you're an ENFP that can say that and really tune into that, I think you have a lot of development here. I think that is the expectation you're speaking to, Antonia.
Yeah, emotional honesty, not with other people. You made me mad, or I'm feeling sad, but emotional honesty of like, yeah, there's some things motivating me that probably aren't all noble.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe I'm not 100% noble in everything I'm doing, and this means not doing things like virtue signaling. Right? It's not having an affectation or a performance of something.
Yeah.
It's being the real deal. It's being the real thing.
And it's not even bad things all the time. Like, for example, there was a moment with, I have ENFP preferences. So there's a moment with our two children, Sawyer, who's 16, Piper, who's 11. And Piper wanted to do something and Sawyer didn't want to do it. And so I constructed this whole like scene where I was going to call Sawyer into the room and I was going to ask him, do you want to do this? And I'm going to say no. And I was going to like play act this whole thing out and kind of create it so that no one had their feelings hurt. And it actually went terribly wrong. Like, I tried to create this little scene and like kind of obfuscate the truth of what was going on. And it all kind of fell apart, and it actually made it way worse than if I was just very direct. And I'm like, so it all broke apart. I sit and I'm like, what was going on for me? Why did I do that? Well, I wanted to preserve feelings. Why do I want to preserve feelings? Well, I can't stand when other people feel disappointed. Why don't I want other people to feel disappointed? Well, it's because I can't bear feeling disappointed for myself. So because I would never want to feel disappointed, I didn't want other people disappointed. So I created this whole thing, all this extra, right? I'll just stop there. And it caused all this challenge. Well, it's because I can't face being disappointed. So I don't want to see anyone else be disappointed. And getting really honest with myself that was what was motivating that entire scenario that actually caused way worse outcome than if I'd just been like direct and felt the disappointment for the other person and then had tuned into myself. So that wasn't anything, no bad motivation. It was actually well-intended. It was just a nuanced motivation. So it's not even bad versus good. It's like, what is really going on? And that's what you're on the hunt for with this process. And I would say that's the sophisticated place that you want to get, is really understanding why you're doing what you're doing from any given moment or any given situation.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example. Thank you so much for being willing to bring it up. And that's where the parental energy comes in too. Like
Yeah.
you are literally a parent of these two people that you were having this experience with.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think it's a great example of how introverted feeling or authenticity wants emotional experiences for other people. They want them to be able to feel a certain way. That's part of the parental. It's like, I want you to be able to
Or protect from feeling a bad way, right?
protect from feeling a bad way, feel certain positive emotions. I want you to be able to be totally free to be yourself, right? This is very common for EFPs to parent the world and specifically their children by allowing them to be totally individual, unique, like however you want to show up, I will totally honor that. And that is not a compulsion, but I would say it's an instinct. It's an instinct for ENFPs. But here's the thing: is oftentimes the way that the person is parenting comes from a desire to be parented that way.
Yeah.
Most of the time, an EFP, and in this case, an ENFP, that is allowing others to show up 100% themselves, whether it's serving them or not, whether it's good for them or not, or the right choice, or creating a good experience for them. It's because they need to be given permission to be their full selves. And so a piece of this and having high expectations for this function is using it to self-parent. And that's why we're talking about the high expectations being having a way to process your emotions. In the case that you mentioned, disappointment was something that, at least at the time that you had that situation, you had not learned how to process, right? Have a complete experience of disappointment.
I'm still working on it. I do not like disappointment.
Right.
Oh man.
And yet your expectation for yourself is that you don't just go, well, I just don't like feeling disappointed, and that's the end of it. It's like, well, but that's a feeling and you have to process it.
And I need to have higher capacity in my introverted feeling or authenticity to be able to accommodate that emotion as well.
That's right.
That's really what I want. Now it's hard, but I want that.
Yeah. And that's much closer to being our real selves than any persona or affectation that we'll put out to the world. Because oftentimes this permissiveness of everybody being their 100% self is not usually the person actually being their true selves. It's their affectation of it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the thing that they want to present to the world, where there's space for that too, right? People get to choose their own personas. But an ENFP that has high expectations for this part of themselves will actually be going, yeah, but what's the real, right? Like what's the real feeling under this? What's the real identity under this? Are you just playing around with identities? That's okay. We're allowed to do that. But are you getting too attached to something that actually might be more persona than it is the true self? Like I'm understanding what's motivating me. I'm understanding my emotional experience. I'm understanding my values. I'm not just going with the first one, but I'm doing true inner inquiry. And when somebody with ENFP preferences models this for others and helps them work through this, a lot of times on the other side, the person's like, oh, well, I guess I'm not as attached to that thing that I thought I was. Maybe it's actually more complex. And that complexity, like you said, it's not good or bad. It just is. Most of the stuff that we have to deal with as people is not good or bad. It just is. And so not vilifying, not virtuizing, not, like creating these like sort of black and white thinking. Introverted feeling or authenticity, when it's at its best, it sheds black and white thinking, right? It sees the nuance, the complexity. It understands, it sympathizes with almost everybody because it understands what it means to be a human having a human experience. And that goes all the way from people who do not share your ideals or values, all the way over to people who do, right? It's easiest it's easiest to humanize people who agree with us. It's far more difficult to humanize people who think things that we might even believe are dangerous. And yet they are humans having a human experience. And for some reason, they have come to their values. So what is in that needs to be explored? And how is that in me too? So these high expectations help an ENFP become a beautiful model. And even more so, it helps them find their true nature. It helps them find things that are much closer to personal crusades, campaigns, things that are really important to the individual. It might be allyship in some way. It might be a conviction. It might be a religious ideal, right? There's lots of different ways that this can express and show up, and there's room for all of it. It's about finding the one that is true for you.
Yeah.
So that trueness of self requires time, space, patience. When you're doing this work, oftentimes you're not getting a lot done in the outside world, right? Like it's inner exploration work. I always call it soul spelunking. And the reward or the outcome isn't always seen in productivity, but it's seen in a stillness of self. It's seen in when you do enough emotional processing, you can tell from the person because they have kind of like their nervous system is sort of quiet, right? They're not like agitated. Not everything is super high energy. Not everything is like vigilant. Like they're just kind of calm and centered because they know themselves and they're accepting all of themselves. And so I don't think that that's an unreasonable expectation for this function.
Yeah. Any other comments on the co-pilot?
I would say that when an ENFP hasn't had super high expectations for this part of themselves, oftentimes they struggle with boundaries because they don't always know where they end and the other person begins. That's introverted feeling or authenticity work. And so setting good boundaries is usually a sign that they're working on this. And this is good for themselves and for others. And then I would also say that self-care is usually a component to this. If a person is really honoring themselves and showing true respect to the self, which is part of what comes along with, really understanding the self comes with compassion. It comes with an awareness of what's good for you. And so self-care is also a symbol. And then also self-care for others, like understanding the importance of self-care in general. So not pushing other people too hard, but also part of self-care is doing good things for ourselves and pushing ourselves and overcoming obstacles.
Yeah.
And so it's like recognizing that we don't push people too hard, but we also don't give them too much slack.
Yeah.
And that is also the relationship that an ENFP should build with themselves.
I think also without higher expectations from this process, it can be inappropriate deference of authority to outside entities or people.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel like you don't have sovereignty in your life and you're as an ENFP and you're like, why does this system or this institution or this person have so much authority over me? It's an inappropriate authority. It probably means there's some work that you need to, it's kind of along the lines of, it's probably how you'll codify or think about the boundaries. Mm-hmm. You'll think about it probably in authority lines more than like relational boundaries. Mm-hmm. You'll probably think of like, can they tell me what to do? Do I have to take my orders from this? Or how do I see the moral drive of this authority in my life or something? I think it's really attuning to say, well, I need to have self-authority, self-sovereignty, to know that I'm a complete entity within myself without needing an authority outside of myself to guide. I can attune to those, but that's me deciding to attune to it. It's not overriding my own sense of self. Mm-hmm. It's very nuanced and it's possibly complex for some people listening, but I think that's really the key here is self-sovereignty and self-authority in this area.
I think that's an absolutely perfect thing to mention because otherwise it sounds a little too like extroverted feeling maybe, which is boundary setting in relationships. I think the concept of sovereignty is perfect. Yeah. It's like, am I a sovereign person? And when somebody with ENFP preferences doesn't feel sovereign, weirdly enough, they have a tendency to reject all authority.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's almost like a reaction to not feeling whole and of the self. But when they have a sense of self-sovereignty, when they understand that they are a sovereign person, they're far more likely to be cooperative, actually.
Yeah.
Because they don't feel like they're losing anything in the transaction.
That's a good metric then.
Yeah.
To kind of just look at your cooperation versus like pushback on that.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, I think it helps with building good relationships. If you haven't done a lot of your own processing, right? If you don't know yourself well, if you have a bunch of, I almost think of it as like emotional plaque inside that needs to be worked out, then it's hard to invest emotional energy in other people. And so when introverted feeling or authenticity is, when it's working really well and one has high expectations, there's a desire and a willingness to pour emotional energy into other people.
Mm.
And so relationships become less shallow, right? They become deeper. And it's a willingness to show the self to somebody else, right? Because I think there's this great quote that says, when we fully accept ourselves, uh, other people relax in our presence because they know nothing will be rejected in them, since nothing has been rejected in the self. And I think that's like a willingness to show vulnerabilities, because nobody can use it against you, because it's not like nobody can go, well, I'm pointing something out inside of you that you don't know. And it's like, okay, that's fine, because I accept that too. So it's really a matter of accepting the self, and to a point where other people can read it off of you and know that they will be accepted too. Now, that doesn't mean accepting things that you find.
You want to change.
What's that?
That might need to be changed, or you want to change, right?
Yeah, or accepting things that are against your ethics, like behaviors, right? It means accepting people, not necessarily accepting their behaviors. But there's still, I mean, we accept ourselves without accepting all of our behaviors, right? Which is the recipe for positive change. So it leads to more intimate relationships as well.
Absolutely. Okay, that's the good news, by the way, for ENFPs. This driver and co-pilot, exploration, authenticity. Let's talk about the challenging news now. So let's move back from the co-pilot. Right behind the co-pilot sits a 10-year-old mental process. Again, we've nicknamed it effectiveness. Extroverted thinking is the part of an ENFP that gets the job done. The leader, the inner leader that's in you that may want the higher position and the take charge energy. Maybe it's focused on resource management. Every ENFP is different, but often this can show up as the drive, the professional side of you, the one that wants to accomplish, see an impact, create resource, maybe generate wealth or success. And it's got about the sophistication of a 10-year-old. And it's the polar opposite of introverted feeling, this extroverted thinking. It's almost like a coin that you have two sides to. It's the exact opposite of introverted feeling. And so if introverted feeling is tuned into the self and what's going on for me and my motivations, extroverted thinking doesn't care about that. It wants to see results. I don't care how you're feeling. Let's get the output. Let's get the thing done. Let's manage this resource. Let's not take the individual into account. That's going to mess up the system out here. And so you can already see within your own personality, these two processes are in, you could say, conflict or opposition to each other in a way. It's almost like if the one side of the coin is up, the other one's down, and vice versa. So this is very important to think about this properly, because outsized expectations or weird expectations here can hijack the rest of your car in your personality. So if you're following along in the car model, we're at the 10-year-old position. What are some expectations, Antonia? Let's go through these for effectiveness.
So this is the reason why we call it a 10-year-old is in John Beebe's model, he calls it an eternal child. And it comes with some eternal child energy. Now, it's the first time in our function set that we run into a sense of uncertainty. Our first two functions, we have a high degree of certainty in. We feel pretty confident. This is the first time that we lack confidence. We lack certainty. It is, like you mentioned, it's the polarity opposite of the co-pilot, which we talked about having parental energy. So these two functions, the parental energy function and the eternal child energy, they're also, and I'm just going to mention this because I've mentioned it in the other podcasts, they are what John calls the axis of relating to others, meaning that this is how we show up to the world. And our co-pilot, our parental energy, is how we feel like we contribute to the world. This is how we're like part of society. I'm going to be bringing this to you. In the case of ENFPs, it's like modeling authenticity and showing what it means to be like a sovereign person and understanding and valuing the human experience. And on the other side of this is a more childlike way of interacting with the world. So what ends up happening is we end up almost like a 10-year-old. Sometimes they do things really well. In fact, sometimes quite impressively, but they don't really know they did until they get a head pat for it, right? They're like, did I do that well? Let me know if I did that well. Look, Mom, I'm going to do a cartwheel in front of you. Wow, that was an amazing cartwheel. Okay, it was an amazing cartwheel. Mom told me it was an amazing cartwheel, so it was an amazing cartwheel. So we're seeking outer world feedback to let us know that we've done this well. And because that's the kind of weird relationship we have with this function, we should set reasonable expectations for it. And those the unreasonable expectations would be that we get this perfect every time. Just like a 10-year-old might have some idealism around landing every cartwheel perfectly. That's what we're trying to avoid, is unreasonable expectations. So reasonable expectations with extroverted thinking or effectiveness is you can practice and embrace organization and prioritization. You can do that, right? It's okay. It's okay to want things to be organized. It's okay to want to build systems. It's very common for people with ENFP preferences to be entrepreneurial and want to build something, right? Want to build a structure, want to build a business, want to build something, make something in the outside world, something that has some impact. That's all reasonable. It's very reasonable to want to build. It's very reasonable to believe that you can apply this to problem solving and do practical problem solving with this function. It's reasonable that you have an analytical side that understands deeper concepts and things that are like that require a more logical mind. It's reasonable to expect good time management from yourself, not perfect, but decent, right? Like you're trying to manage your time. And this one is sometimes hard for ENFPs. Some ENFPs have mastered it, but a lot of ENFPs struggle with it. It's also reasonable to expect yourself to have some candor, right? To be able to communicate directly when things are important to communicate. So it doesn't mean that you're transparent in all ways, but you can be candid, right? Candid about your opinions, candid about the things that are going on for you.
You mean when you have a situation with your kids, you don't create an entire scene to help emotions. You just say it directly. What's going on?
You got it.
That's what you're talking about. Not that that's ever happened to me, but.
Exactly. That you said that you did like 20 minutes ago. That's right. So yes, candor is a reasonable expectation.
More directness.
Mm-hmm. Unreasonable expectations is that you're going to nail all this on the first try. Okay. So the idea of being an entrepreneur, it will always be a struggle to finish strong. It will always be a struggle. And to believe that you're always going to finish strong and do it beautifully every time is an unreasonable expectation. So to beat yourself up for that is it's building sandcastles on the beach, right? If you expect yourself to nail it the first time every time, you're going to be constantly disappointed. Another thing is that your time management will be flawless, that you will be perfectly organized, that your problem solving will always come up with the best solution, that you will always know the right thing to say, right? And in the situation with Sawyer and Piper, it was like you learn the lesson in post.
Yeah.
That is a lot of what happens with this function. You're going to learn a lot of things in post, and that's okay, right? Don't expect yourself to nail all of this the first time.
Yeah, I think the other way this can show up too is really believing that you have what it takes in a resource way, energy, time, money, to be able to manage all the loops you keep opening with your driver process, quite frankly. So as an ENFP, you have all these new ideas and they strike you. And it's like, I want to do that and I want to do that. And before you know it, you might have 20 projects running. And to believe that you're going to actually be able to do a good job at all 20 is nuts. You probably couldn't even do a good job at 5 of these. And again, from personal experience, I'm speaking. You usually get like 1, maybe 2. And then you got to close that loop and then move to the next one. But to do it all at the same time, that's a pipe dream. That's an idealism. And that's way too high expectation for this part of yourself, that you can manage all of that and do it well. Yep. I think that you can do it for a time or have the affectation of managing it well. But once that breaks down, you're headed for a crash. And I think a lot of ENFPs have this boom and bust cycle.
Yes.
And disappointments and feeling like a failure because they just bit off way more than they can chew. It's not that you're a failure at all, like holistically. It's just, you just have too much you're doing at one given time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think the way that a lot of ENFPs, the language in their mind is, I have to be productive.
Yeah.
So it's an overemphasis on productivity. And, but I think it is experienced in opening too many loops and having that idealism around the ability, like I have sufficient resource to close all the loops that I've opened, even though I have a very complicated life and already I'm already spinning a bunch of plates. So I think that like, I need to be productive. Sort of the overemphasis on it indicates that you have too high of expectations. And just like we mentioned before, if you have too low of expectations, you're going to deal with sort of a disappointment in the self, right? Like I could do better. But if you have too high of expectations, you're going to be disappointed every time you fail. And this is the first place where reasonable expectations really need to be considered. And also the idea of, how am I seeking head pats, right? Like, in what ways am I doing too much, maybe overcomplicating my life because I'm seeking approval from the outside world, and just recognizing that that's a mechanism. And so there are ways that this can get, it's almost like it tricks you,
Yeah.
right? It's like, if I have all the things that are the markers of success, and a part of that too is comparing yourself to other people who have this function higher. I've seen this happen a lot. People who have ENFP preferences thinking, well, how does an ETJ do it? Right? That I should have the same results that they have. That's too high of expectations, right? We should have high expectations in our driver, but not in our 10-year-old function.
Yeah.
So I was waiting for you to, I was going to see if you have anything to say on this one, because
I don't have anything else except, I don't have anything coming up readily right this second.
All right. There was something that you had mentioned before that I'm going to tee you up for just a little bit, because I thought it was very interesting.
All right, drum roll. Here we go.
You caught your extroverted thinking or effectiveness in business going, well, if I can't be the most successful, I'll be the most
clever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if all ENFPs struggle with this, but I'm sure someone listening right now with that preference does. I'm sure that cleverness is I think that there's a competitive nature to ENFPs that we try to maybe obfuscate, but it's kind of there. And I think it comes from this 10-year-old part. It's like this 10-year-old process of effectiveness understands hierarchy and achievement and the career ladder or the resource ladder. It understands like the chain of command and all this. And so it sees that and it goes, well, I want to play that game. I want to be competitive and I want to play it. But sometimes it says, I don't know if I can play it the traditional way. I don't have all the, so I'm going to do it differently. I know if I can't win directly, I'll go a little bit to the side and I'll be creatively different. I'll be unique. I'll be the differentiating option, the unique selling proposition of life rather than the direct competition. And so it's a competitiveness, I think, that comes in a little bit of a different channel in over cleverness. And I think that goes back to opening too many loops, too many projects. It's like, oh, I'll do, instead of one business really well and compete there, I'll do 7 sort of good and that'll win by volume or whatever you would tell yourself. Again, that's personal to me. It could be different for you listening, but I think the principle stands in whatever you apply it to. Cleverness or uniqueness is your winning strategy in a competitive frame.
Yeah. Or being super smart or super analytic.
Sure.
Right. And I agree. I think it's going to be different for every ENFP, but thank you for being willing to share that particular way that it shows up for you, because I think it was an interesting way. It was like a moment of self-observation. You're like, I think I'm trying to be too clever. And it's actually putting too much burden on my extroverted thinking. It's creating too complicated of a system because I'm attempting to be clever here. And we all do it with our 10-year-old function. 100% of people do that. And
well, I realized it was insecurity. I'm like, I don't think I can compete directly. So by clever, I won't be measured by the same standards. I'm changing the entire measurement system that I kind of control because I invented it a little bit or I've been clever with it. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in control of it, then I get to measure myself as high as I want. I can make myself as successful as I want in my own mind. It's a way to cover insecurity of, do I have what it takes?
And I think when somebody with ENFP preferences puts too much burden on this part of them, they're actually suppressing their other innate gifts.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's, if everything is going to this part of you to just try to keep up, then your intuition and your feeling don't get an opportunity to shine as much. And so it's just something that somebody with these preferences needs to like make sure, am I putting too much of a burden on this part of myself? Am I having too high of expectations?
Yeah.
Am I really worried that I'm going to fail and I'm just like loading myself down now? But at the same time, differentiating can sometimes be not playing the game the way that other people play. And so not getting the same reward that other people do. And so an expectation of ENFP can have of this is that, no, I can be a successful human being. I can have success. I just need to make sure that I'm not in a hamster wheel.
Yeah. An example of this was we started our membership program a few months ago. And I was like, we're not going to call it a membership. That's what everybody calls it. Everybody's got this XYZ plus membership. And we're going to do something different. We're going to be unique. That's going to be the winning strategy. And then we call it personality quest, which we still call our live calls quest calls, but people weren't getting it. They were like, what is this? What is a personality quest? And I'm like, it's a membership sort of, but it's not, we're not calling it a membership. And they're like, okay, sorry. we switched the name to Personality Hacker Plus membership. And now, oh, I know what that is. I can join that. It's like, all right, it's mundane and what everybody's doing. We're not unique, but it actually is working way better and people get what it is. And they're like, I want to join that. That sounds fantastic. So it's that kind of stuff. I think that when you're too clever, it made it complex and we weren't getting the signups and people interested in the way I thought we would. And here it was, I was over cleverizing, if that's a word, all the things that we were doing with that. So I think that's like, I'm trying to find a real tangible example if somebody's listening. What does it mean to be over clever? How does that show up? That's an example of like, from my life, how I was trying to outsmart our messaging or something.
Yeah. It's so funny because we had for so long made fun of the word plus.
Yes.
Everything is plus. And here we are. We're like, okay, well, you can't beat him, join him. That said, like you mentioned, these are two sides of the same coin: introverted feeling authenticity and extroverted thinking effectiveness. There's two sides of the same coin. And so part of what we can do, or part of what you can do as somebody with ENFP preferences, is you can spin the coin. You can make it so that not one side is up where the other side is. You can make it so that they're actually working together with this 10-year-old supporting the parental energy. And that's a part of contribution, right? How you give back to the world. And so, I mean, much of Personality Hacker is your brainchild, right? Like you're the brains behind it. You are the hard work. You are the person who has created all these structures. And you did so because there was a passion behind it, right? There was a real will to do this, to help people find who they are, their unique selves, to introspect, to really get to know who they are so they can give themselves permission to be themselves and accept themselves. And you've built an entire structure around that I just get to I get to show up at a microphone, but you really do the lion's share of all of the business work. And I think you've done an incredible job, honestly.
Thank you. I'll take that head pat.
Yeah.
My 10-year-old effectiveness loves that. I just beaming. Thank you.
Well, you deserve it. You more than deserve
Appreciate it.
Yeah. And it's because I think in large part it supports something that's important to you.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And when I lose sight of that, I go off the rails. And that's the key thing, is to stay connected to what's important. And I think for an ENFP, that really helps it stay in its proper balance.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the other challenging news. This 3-year-old, memory is the nickname. Introverted sensing is the technical name. This is a deeply uncertain part of the ENFP personality. It's an important part, though. You identify with this. It just feels more childlike and a little bit uncertain. Well, not a little bit, a lot uncertain. You're deeply uncertain. Yeah. And this can show up in all sorts of ways. When we're deeply uncertain, we overcompensate, we undercompensate. We have a hard time having nuance or fidelity to things. We kind of over black and white thinking around them. And this happens for ENFPs here too. So let's talk about, clearly we're not going to expect a lot from this, from this part of an ENFP's mind or cognition or personality. So what is the proper expectation here at the 3-year-old place?
Well, I wouldn't say we don't expect a lot. I would say we have to have a reasonable expectation.
Fair enough.
Well, the one expectation that we all have to have, no matter what our personality type is this function we will never feel a sense of certainty in it.
Yeah.
We have to expect that there's always going to be a question mark. Unlike the 10-year-old function, the child that feels uncertainty, but then looks around and goes, did I do a good job? And gets a head pat and goes, okay, I did a good job. This part of us, this inferior part, it won't receive a head pat. It doesn't feel a sense of certainty just if it gets validation from the outside world. Like, we have to integrate it. We have to build a good relationship with it. It's an in-house piece. The co-pilot and the 10-year-old are part of a relationship we have with others. But John calls the driver and the 3-year-old, or the dominant and inferior, he calls that the axis of relating to ourselves. So this is our relationship to ourself. And that means that the uncertainty that comes along with it, that's why we feel deep uncertainty, because there's no way to validate it. There's only ways to integrate it.
Yeah.
So what kinds of expectations should we have? Well, first, we'll always feel uncertain. It will always be a bit of a stretch. It will always be something that we have some sense of struggle around. That's an expectation we should feel. It will never feel comfortable. So we have to expand our comfort zone to include its uncertainty. Like, uncertainty in this part of us needs to be a part of our and like we expand our comfort zone to include it, right? So we can feel a sense of at least familiarity with the uncertainty that comes here. So what are some of the expectations and specificity that we can feel? Well, we can do, or somebody with ENFP preferences can do reflective learning from the past. All right. You can reflect on your experiences of the past. and learn lessons, vital lessons from them. It's not the expectation of just running away from your past or believing that doesn't define you, believing that you shouldn't have to think about what came before, or that there might be inconvenient information in there. That's letting yourself off the hook too much.
Yeah.
You won't be consumed by these memories, but you do need to process them. So a reasonable expectation is that you can process your experiences from the past. Another reasonable expectation is that you can develop a routine. That is something that can happen. You and I have talked a lot about how for people with ENP preferences, it might look more like a rhythm than a routine. It might be seasonal. It might be something that, you don't go work out at the gym at the same time every time you go, but it's like a block of time. It's like, sometime between 4 and 6, right? So it's like a rhythm of it. And it might not be the same day, but if it's not this day, then it's definitely the next day. It's more of a sense of responsibility to self-care, to the responsibilities we have to the outside world, to making sure that we're showing up for the things that we need to show up for. It's just feeling a sense of consistency and continuity to our responsibilities. And that's very reasonable for an ENFP to experience. And then I think there's an attention to detail that is reasonable to expect. I think when we really get into, or I keep saying we because I have ENTP preferences, but when an ENFP really starts to integrate this part of who they are, they can find themselves being very attentive to details, but not too much, because sometimes you can kind of get sucked into it and be overly attuned to details that don't matter. So a reasonable expectation is to learn over time which are the details that matter that you have to attune to and which ones are not. I think that's reasonable.
I think to realize what you desire or what you imagine requires a little extra thinking about how it will play out in a real way. And I think that's where you're talking about detail is, it can be like very specific detail, like focusing on, the grammar of a sentence and like looking at that. But I think when you say detail, you really mean the realness of something, the detail of it. It's like, wouldn't it be great to have, and you name some abstract idea and this really cool thing. And you're like, it's like, yeah. And then it's like the quote unquote devil's in the details. You all of a sudden go, well, okay, how would that actually look though, in a real way, in a real practical way with the details involved? And I think this can look in a real basic way for an ENFP, forgetting that when your meeting ends at the top of the hour and the next one starts at the top of the hour, like you needed a time to go take a break to the bathroom and get a drink, and realize, oh, I don't just make that up by my imagination. Like that's a real need. I'm on a real timeline, or there's a real detail there. I have to give myself switching time when I close the one down to prepare for the next call or something. I think that's like how it might show up for an ENFP in like a real tangible way. The detail part.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Would you say, Antonia, that one reasonable expectation is that an ENFP could watch this entire video and not be bored?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they might not find us very interesting, but if they find us interesting at
But
all.
if they find something interesting, they should be able to watch it all the way through.
Yes. Patience.
Patience. There we go.
Patience is
That's what came up for me is I see a lot of ENFPs just pushing away that idea.
I know.
I don't have time for this. It's like, what? How busy is your life? You don't have time to spend time with things that matter to you.
Well, actually, I don't think ENFPs say they don't have time. They say, I don't have the attention span.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
And so the reasonable expectation is that you can have the attention span.
Learning how to focus.
Because that's right.
Extroverted intuition, that driver process for an ENFP loves to bounce and connect quickly. And so that requires some diffusion of intensity, because you're like, okay, that's cool, but what's over here? And you bring it over, and what's over there? And kind of the rabbit mind of bouncing all over helps you connect the dots. But once those dots are connected, or at times you don't need that part, you need to be able to be patient and focus on a process, or see something manifest on a timeline of sorts. And I think that is a struggle. It's, for me, a struggle too. I think it's also generational. I think our modern world doesn't help ENFPs develop this part of themselves. Like, I had the benefit of growing up in a world that was analog. I had to read books. We didn't have videos on 2x speed or audio on 2x speed. Like, you had to listen to it in real time. Heck, half the stuff was broadcast live, and if you missed it, you didn't get a second chance unless you recorded it. So I grew up in a generation that really taught me as an ENFP to pay attention to some of the timeline and emergent information as it comes out. And I think in our random access digital world where there's somebody right now listening to this on 2 times speed.
Mhm.
Many people are listening to 2 times speed. We have those tools,
Mhm.
right? Or you might even just throw the transcription into ChatGPT and not even listen to us at all and just read the transcript
Mhm.
to look for keywords or data points. We're losing a sense of this part of our culture and our world, this memory or introverted sensing part culturally. And so I think it does matter. You might have to put more attention to this and intention to this part of yourself than even previous generations like myself did if you're young.
Yep.
And so that's something to be take into account, that things have changed and this might need more mindfulness to actually focus on this part of yourself.
Yep. Yeah. Patience and the ability to be bored. Yep. And that you don't have to constantly be getting a dopamine hit with absolutely like in your intuition.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's like, don't believe the first pattern. Don't just go with the first aha. Don't go with just the first hit. It's like, do further inquiry, think about it more.
Yeah.
And it's a reasonable expectation that an ENFP can think about things longer than like 60-second increments.
Well, yeah.
And I think a lot of ENFPs do. They've figured it out,
yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, I mean, I know tons of when people are like, no ENFP can listen to it. It's like, no, you can't. That's you. You are an individual. But there are plenty of ENFPs that can.
Well, this might be an exception then to where we would introduce a little higher expectation here than maybe most personality types because of that cultural piece that's missing. In other words, the expectation is, yeah, you're not going to be great at this. You're always going to have uncertainty. But if you don't set yourself an expectation to develop this, the culture around you that once just forced it upon you is not going to anymore. So in a way, you need to probably, for you as an ENFP particularly, and maybe ENTPs when we talk about them too, have a higher expectation for this part of yourself than maybe other types would have for themselves.
Or even the world is telling you should have.
Actually, what I would say, instead of expectation, I'd say intention than expectation. Intentionality, because this is, again, there's no external pressure for it as much anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important.
Well, and if you notice, that's why I said reasonable expectation, not no.
Exactly.
That wasn't like, no, I'm not saying that one should have no or low expectations for their 3-year-old or inferior function. They just need to have it reasonable. They just need to understand that things are always going to be a bit of a struggle. It's always going to be kind of hard. When we talk about rhythms and routines, you're probably going to have to do a lot of refinding your rhythm, meaning that you'll get disrupted because extroverted intuition or exploration is a disruptive function. That's what it does. It disrupts. And so you're going to do a lot of disrupting your own routines and rhythms, and you're going to have to refine them. And sometimes it takes months to do that. But the reasonable expectation is that you will refine it, and you need to keep trying. You need to keep trying to stretch your attention span. You need to keep trying to refine your rhythm and routine. You need to continue to develop appreciation for the details, right? The devil's in the details. You need to keep, like, the expectation is you don't stop trying. And then as you try, your capacity expands. You get better at these things. And that includes appreciating tradition and appreciating where we came from, right? Like, all of these are part of it. So the expectation is it's hard and you have to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And when you do, you get rewarded.
Yeah. Well, certainly your intuition and your feelings can ride on top of it and perform better.
Right. And you'll know that you're doing introverted sensing or memory well when you have a higher capacity for acceptance. So introverted sensing is post-processing our experiences or experiences in general. Sometimes it's post-processing other people's experiences, right? Through reading or whatever. But it's processing experiences. And when we process our own experiences, we know we have a complete processing cycle when on the other side, we experience acceptance. So it is reasonable to expect somebody with ENFP preferences to be able to do a complete process of an experience and to be able to get to a place of acceptance. Now, it might take a while. Again, the expectation is it's always going to be a struggle. It can be hard to do, and yet you can do it. That is a reasonable expectation.
Anything else for the 3-year-old inferior process you want to mention before we move on?
Well, just like with the co-pilot and the 10-year-old as a spinning coin situation, we can do the exact same thing with the driver and the 3-year-old because they are also a polarity. That intuition and that sensing also create two sides of the same coin. And when they work together, that's like a spinning of a coin. And that creates what Carl Jung called a transcendent function, which is it's more than the sum of its parts, right? And when sensing, introverted sensing or memory supports extroverted intuition or exploration, particularly in a relationship to ourselves, what we find ourselves doing is we become ourselves, or somebody with ENFP preferences, they find themselves becoming wise. Like it's wisdom that gets given to the intuition. They're able to dive a little deeper, to have a little bit more patience, to understand the implications of their actions, to understand the implications of their intuitions, to not just sell every idea that comes to them, to not wait to the 11th hour every time, but also to be able to have that intuitive skill that is seasoned with a lot of experiences, right? Like to integrate all of those previous experiences, I think is part of what gets them to that higher order of channeling. It's like, oh, I've been here before. I've seen this before. I know what pattern this is. Oh, this is a hard one. This was a difficult situation, but I have seen myself process it, so I know that it can be processed. So now I have better, higher quality information to bring to my my intuitive pattern recognition. So when one brings it into their intuition, now the coin starts spinning, and now they have access to all sorts of skills and capacities, which again creates higher expectations. So, as the premise of all of this is when we don't have these good expectations, these reasonable expectations, we find ourselves not being able to receive the love we're trying to send to ourselves. And so, like not giving up on these parts of ourselves, not giving up and watching ourselves become more transcended, we just start to receive love like crazy. We just start to appreciate who we are and who we've become and all the things we've gone through. Self-confidence, I believe the algorithm of self-confidence is it's overcoming obstacles and then taking an accounting of that. And overcoming obstacles is something that extroverted intuition or exploration kind of enjoys doing, right? It's like, give me an obstacle and overcome it. But we don't always take the time to do the introverted sensing or the memory of the processing of the experience. And at that point, when we process it, well, now we go, oh, I did that, didn't I? Wow, I guess I did that really well. I guess I'm a bit of a badass. Okay, yeah, I have confidence. I can go into the next challenge, and I know I'm going to be okay. Not just winging it, not just assuming we can, not taking off more, biting off more than we can chew, but actually with a sober-minded approach, going, no, I can handle this because I've handled it in the past. And now we have self-confidence, which removes that obstruction to receiving self-love.
So let's tune into what the other 15 people, types can learn from us ENFPs. What's some lessons? Before we do that, let's just do a quick review. We've talked about the ENFP personality, and we talked about the CAR model that comes from our ENFP owner's manual. And the owner's manual goes way deep into some of the concepts we've been talking about in that CAR model. But the CAR model talks about the driver of exploration, extroverted intuition, the co-pilot of authenticity, introverted feeling. Those are the two strongest and highest expected parts of you, right, as an ENFP. Sitting behind the co-pilot is that 10-year-old of effectiveness, extroverted thinking, and then behind the driver is the 3-year-old of introverted sensing, or what we've called memory. And those are more challenging, and they should have proper or reasonable expectations for both of those parts of yourself. So we talked about the expectation of all of those cognitive functions. Now, what is something that we can tune into from an ENFP that's doing well, that is showing themselves love, has removed all the obstructions and has good expectations in place? They have a good relationship with themselves, and they're performing well in life. They're doing well, and they can send and receive love from themselves.
Yeah.
What's a lesson that the rest of y'all can learn from us in that?
Good question. So an ENFP that is consistently showing themselves love and receiving that love. So has a good relationship to self, excuse me, that they've earned.
It's contagious. The frog in your throat is contagious.
I know. What'd you do? You gave it to me, huh? What we see is, I'm gonna call it something weird, but I called the ENTP one something weird too. I'm gonna call it a visionary closer. Right. So what is a closer? A closer is somebody that completes the job, closes the loop, right? And it's not uncommon. Finishes strong. That's right. It's not uncommon for people with ENFP preferences to be quite visionary, right? They see the future possibilities. They see how things could be different. There's a disruptive part of them that just wants to disrupt the status quo and create a different, maybe better future. So there's usually a visionary aspect to an ENFP, but there's not always that closing part. And oftentimes when an ENFP needs to close loops and be more responsible, sometimes they lose a little of that intuition. It's like they're not allowed to be innovative. They're not allowed to be visionary. So when an ENFP has figured out how to spin those coins, right? How to transcend some of this and remove the obstacles and obstructions to feeling self-love, you see them have both qualities. They marry both the visionary aspect and the ability to close loops. So you've got somebody who sees this vision of the future. It doesn't have to be a save the world vision. It can just be something that they can build and make happen. A vision for their family, a vision for a business, a vision for something in their world.
A movie they want to make.
Exactly.
Whatever it might be.
Right. A project that they want to manifest. And with the discipline and dedication, with the patience that comes along with integrating introverted sensing or memory, with the ability to organize and prioritize that comes along with the extroverted thinking or effectiveness, but also that innovation plus the drive that comes from introverted feeling and authenticity. All of that allows the ENFP to still have those visions, but have reasonable ones that are that they're able to manifest, ones that aren't too big of a pull, one that doesn't burn them out, one that is in alignment with their values and what's important to them and who they see themselves at, and with some patience and understanding that things happen over time, right? Incrementally over time, which is something that introverted sensing or memory reminds them of, that things don't just happen overnight, that it takes some patience, it takes some follow through, it takes some consistency. And with all of that, you get somebody who can show the world how to have a vision, but then also so be creative, be innovative, see outside the box, but also have the discipline to be able to make it happen and to finish strong.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. And I think that the co-pilot of authenticity is the big lever here in a lot of it, because what it really means is the quick hit and the excitement of a new idea can create a lot of initial motivation, but you need something that's like a burning ember that when you don't feel good and you got to get up early and work at this thing, or it doesn't feel as, exciting anymore, you're able to continue the sustainable movement. I don't think that's going to come from a routine, only. Like you can use a routine to help support you, but the drive has to be a really deep inner drive of this matters to me as an ENFP. This outcome, this vision I had that I got real excited at the beginning, the going's getting tough right now. This is hard in the middle of it or near the end of it to finish strong, to close it out like you're talking about. But there's a satisfaction in staying strong with the conviction or the motivation or the pull that part of you has that, no, this is the right choice. I'm still on the right path. Mm-hmm. And it requires you check in early when you feel the excitement to say, is this the right choice? Because that excitement can override that resonance or the core value or of motivation you might have as an ENFP. So you have to really throttle that for a second. Go, is this really what I want? Is this really what drives me? Is this really the outcome I desire? And if it is, I think you can connect to that and that can pull you along to be that visionary closer.
Yeah. So
you have the idea, but then you have to have the fire along with the support of both, like you said, extroverted thinking and introverted sensing, effectiveness and memory to support that drive. And so that's why the co-pilot is so important for ENFPs.
Well, and you have to believe in yourself.
Yeah.
Right. That's part of that ember is I believe that I believe that I'm capable of doing this, but I believe it's right. Like it's personal to me. So I believe in myself and I'm going to pull from the times in the past that I watched myself overcome obstacles and get through the less rewarding middle or end. I know I can do it. I've seen myself do it and I believe in myself.
Yeah.
And so that's a person who can finish strong.
Yeah. So there's a lot more here for you as an ENFP, and hopefully you got some insights into how you can have a relationship with yourself that shows love and receives love. One of the key things to remember is love is not earned, like we said at the beginning. It's something that is freely given, but that relationship with yourself is the channel that love is sent on. And so when we talk about expectations, again, the goal is not to say like beat yourself up or, I'll give myself love when I do all these things that Joel and Antonia just said on this podcast. No. You want to be able to send and receive love immediately. This is to increase the quality of the self-love you're sending and receiving. Mm-hmm. And the other thing to remember is love is a verb. Love is tied to action. It's tied to outcome. It's tied to behavior and real things. Like it's not just something you sit and ruminate on. You show yourself love by doing loving things for yourself and to yourself. Like you you put yourself in situations that show you love, and you set yourself up, like getting good at expanding your attention span and focus, and your, maybe sticking on a more of a rhythm or routine of life. It's hard. It doesn't feel good. But that's actually an action that's communicating love to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like self-trust. It's like, well, if you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, you're going to erode self-trust. Well, if you say you love yourself, but you're not acting that way, are you really in a good relationship with yourself for that love that you naturally want to send?
Right.
So I think that's really important, that it's an action-focused, real-world, tangible thing. It's not just an abstraction. This is something we can do and measure based on how we are loving ourselves in those ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And so make sure that the signal is clear.
Yeah.
Right. The love signal that you're sending, make sure it's clear so that you can receive it. And that it will be obvious through actions. I think that's a great thing to end on.
You want to be an ENFP that goes a little deeper? We have our ENFP owner's manual that talks about that car model. It goes way deeper into a lot of the growth strategies for your personality type. Whether you're tuned to career paths and what you should be doing with your life, relationships and getting along with other people, or self-identity and understanding yourself. Those are the three usual areas people approach personality types with. This owner's manual really goes into the ENFP personality, and it's an incredible course. I would recommend going to personalityhacker.com and getting that owner's manual for your type, or any type if you're a different type. I think that it's really a fantastic starting point in your life and in understanding your personality more and how it really impacts your day-to-day living. And then obviously, while you're there on our website, I'd love for you to come over under this podcast and make your voice heard. We haven't had a third microphone here set up, but you've been part of this conversation. You've been listening to myself and Antonia talk. Well, now it's time for you to come and make your voice heard. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Below this episode, leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share a story from your life. Maybe some of the things we've talking about have resonated with you, or you've struggled through some stuff. We'd like to hear about those in a story form. We can connect to it. The community at large can connect to it. And I think it'd be a really powerful expression from you to us and the community at large. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. I just want to take a moment of appreciation and gratitude for you being emotionally honest.
Yeah.
There were a couple times that you used examples from your own life that were not perfectly flattering. They were like, oh yeah, I messed up over here. And yeah, I find myself doing this to get approval over here. So I'm super grateful that you were willing to do that in behalf of, somebody watching. It probably helped really solidify some things for them.
I want to do an ENFP episode every week because I get a lot of good feedback from you. You're like, you're good at your 10-year-old Joel, and man, you're really tuned in to your emotional honesty of your co-pilot. Like, whew, well, I would do this all the time now.
I don't know if you know this, but I'm a little smitten. So
yeah, there you go.
I tend to find you to be the highest echelon of ENFPs.
Oh, there you go.
But I'm not biased at all.
No.
Right? Yeah, that's not biased.
Not even a little bit.
All right. Well, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review, specifically a review on iTunes, I read it. It helps us out a lot. It gives us a little shot of adrenaline in the heart to keep going and making these podcasts, because we don't always know, right? Like, are you liking it? Are you digging it? Are you somebody with ENFP preferences and you made it to the end and you thought it was a good thing? Let us know. You might be watching us on YouTube because we have a video podcast. And if you are, you can subscribe, and hit the bell that lets you know when future episodes come out. And as Joel mentioned, you can also leave a comment underneath this video podcast, and let us know what's going on for you in your world. And as Joel mentioned, we have owner's manuals for all the types, and we're talking about ENFPs today, but there is an owner's manual for every personality type at personalityhacker.com, and we highly, highly, highly recommend you get yourself a copy. It goes into deep dives. It talks about common challenges that you might be facing. It talks about how to stay in your flow state, what that looks like, how you get into flow with all of your functions. It talks about some psychological phenomena that every single type deals with, things that are called loops and grips, things that sort of grip our mind and put us at not our best self. But it also talks about ways that we can overcome our fixations and become the best versions of ourselves. So head over to personalityhacker.com and pick yourself up a copy of your owner's manual.
Yeah. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.